I'm gonna discuss identifying issues and formulating questions. If you need more information or you're confused about anything I'm saying, of course you can always email me and ask me a specific question, but most of this information comes straight out of your textbook, chapter 3, so um, that's where you're gonna go first. When you're trying to come up with an argument or an original idea, you always want to start with an observation. So I live in Portland, Oregon, and I have observed that the Craigslist here in Portland is great for really cheap furniture, and it's quite entertaining. So I usually, when I'm looking for an item on Craigslist, like I need to buy a couch or a coffee table or whatever it is, I'll go on the furniture list and I'll get what I need. But then if I have time, I go down this rabbit hole that is Craigslist. And so the other day I was on my little rabbit hole adventure through all the funny postings, and I noticed I was looking at the personal ads, and I made an observation. So I made an observation that men always post images of themselves, and in the first sentence or two, if they're even complete, in the first sentence or two, they make note of their masculinity, and they make sure that the hobbies that they have are masculine hobbies. And then, in contrast, another observation is that women on these Craigslist personal ads are almost never post any photos of themselves. And before they mention their hobbies or their characters, they always explain that there's a caveat to their physical appearance, so that they always make note of some particular physical flaw. So I made that observation and I just questioned it. I just wondered why. What explains this phenomenon? I haven't answered it, but that's just one example of a question that I've asked just within the last couple days. Another example that I've asked in the last couple days is I work in the Writing Center in the Portland Community College, and they recently moved us to a new building. And in this building, or in this room that we're in, there's a bunch of artwork, and there's this one photo called Uncle Skulky, and he's kind of obscure, like he doesn't really match any of the other patterns in the Writing Center. And so a bunch of us were sitting around, and we observed that this painting was, or drawing, whatever it is, was kind of out of sorts, right? So we read the label on the side of it, and it said that it was paid for by the Portland Community College Bond in 2014, but that it was completed in 2003. So we observed that, not only was this an interesting, a little bit out of place, but pretty cool piece of art, but we observed that there had been 11 years between the time it was completed and the time that it was purchased. And so it led us to a bunch of questions, right? We're not necessarily questioning to make an argument like we were on the Craigslist ad. We're just curious. We're curious about how much was the artwork, who proposed it, where did the money from the bond come, where was it for 11 years, and then right over here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but right over by the eye, the full eyeball at the top, there's a demon that has a snout like an aardvark. And so we were wondering why that is. Is there some symbol for aardvarks and, I don't know, demon literature? I have no idea. That's just an example of just a series of questions that we ask about one thing, but we're not necessarily trying to make an argument. And so as you kind of go out into the world over the next week or so, I want you to really think about how many questions you actually ask. And I don't mean actually ask by directly asking them out loud, but the number of questions that your brain formulates in order to find something out. You're either finding something out for your own personal use, or you're finding something out because your teacher didn't give you enough information, or she gave you a silly lecture on PowerPoint and you're not sure, right? I just want you to start making note of all of the questions that you actually do end up asking. And so, a serious question can be really, really frustrating. And it's kind of rare that we ask them, right? Because we live in a society that values productivity and task completion. We really don't like to admit that there are things that we don't know. But that's really kind of what academic discourse is all about, is creating new ideas and disseminating information, and all of that starts with a serious question. And so it can be frustrating, but I really want you to kind of try to love these questions. If you have ever been around a 4-year-old or any young child, you know that they ask so many questions. and it can drive you absolutely crazy. But what I really want you to do is try to channel your inner 4-year-old and just go out into the world extremely curious. One example of my daughter, she's 6 now, so she just learned about Amelia Earhart, and she calls her Amelia Heartburn because she can't remember her name. And so she's wondering what happened to her. Did they ever find her plane? Why is the ocean so big? And will our plane fall into the ocean? And I know that they never found her plane, and I know that the ocean is vast, but I can't really explain why. I highly doubt that our plane will fall into the ocean, but it's possible. But those aren't things that necessarily plague me, right? But my daughter, it really is maddening for her. She's just so concerned. And I kind of want you to try to come up with these questions and come up with a question for your research project that is of deep concern to you. And you want to make sure that it's a question that is going to take some work to answer. It's not just like a how question, because how can usually there's obviously some ways in which that's not true, but it can usually end up just to like a bunch of fact answers. So how does my daughter get to school every day? She rides the bus. How does our teacher prepare for class every day? Well, first she grades papers, or she writes herself a list, right? Those are all questions that can be answered with just a simple fact pattern. And so try to have complex questions. If you are absolutely hating this process, the very, very easiest, simplest reason for you to accept that you need to come up with a serious question is that you have to write a 10-page paper that answers your own question. So the more complex your question is, the more mileage you're going to get with it in your essay. This clip I'm not gonna show you right now, but it's on the PowerPoint. You're most welcome to go into it. It's a 6-minute video about what our brains actually do when we're curious. The short of it here is that when we're curious about a topic, our brains react positively, and they're able to retain the information related to the topic, right? But they also kind of act like these big cyclone clouds, and they help us pick up and retain other unrelated information as well. So this is a great stimulator for learning. And so, think of it that way when you are trying to come up with your research question, is that you're benefiting yourself in all sorts of ways. So when you are writing questions for your writing class, right, not just formulating questions about the world, you're going to want to consider all of the following questions. So what are the concerns of the authors you've been reading? What situations motivate them to write? What frames or contexts do they use to construct their arguments? What is my argument in response to their writing? What is at stake in my argument? Who will be interested in reading what I have to say? How can I connect with sympathetic and antagonistic readers? What kind of evidence will persuade my readers? And what objections are they likely to raise? And what you want to notice here is that there's always another party involved in creating written text. You're always creating them for the reader. And your author is always creating them for a reader. So think of questions and inquiry as just kind of responding to another idea and using that other idea to help formulate your own. And that all starts with asking a question and just considering a number of factors that are obviously listed right here. So when you're reading, your textbook will tell you that you need to do 3 main things when you're reading. You want to make sure that you can identify an issue, that you understand the situation, and that you're able to formulate a question. And that's fine for your textbook, but what you really want to do before you even identify an issue is just observe, right? Go out into the world and observe and figure out what exactly is happening. And then, consider what is happening. And then the easiest way into an argument is to consider what is wrong with what is happening. That what is wrong with what is happening is your issue. And then you turn that issue into a question. So here's a few examples. A situation is that different state legislators are passing legislation, right over here on the top left, to prevent Spanish-speaking students from using their own language in school. So that is a statement that just explains what is happening. It makes no value judgment whatsoever. And then the issue considers that situation and makes a value judgment, right? It determines good or bad. And so the issue is that most research on learning contradicts the idea that students should be prevented from using their own language in the process of learning a new language. So that's the issue, right? Then you take it one step further and you complicate it even more and you ask a question that stems from your issue, which is, under what conditions should students be allowed to use their own language while they learn English? That is a complex question. It is an issue-based question, and it is a question whose answer will be absolutely arguable, which is exactly what we're looking for. Another example is a manufacturing company has plans to move to your city with the promise of creating jobs in a period of high employment. It's a situation, judge, it's just objective, right? And then you find issue with that. Someone is going to have a problem. So that someone feels that the company will compromise the quality of life for surrounding community because the manufacturing process will pollute air. So now you've taken your situation, just what is happening. You've found something wrong with what is happening. You've made that statement, and then you turn your issue into a question. So the question is, how do we reconcile, the fact that we do need some company to come in because we need much needed jobs, but we don't want this company to come in. So how do we get the city to make sure that doesn't happen? I just broke my own rule, right? Because I asked a how question. So when you're identifying issues, you want to think about four things. They don't just simply exist in the world well formed, right? You kind of construct what you see as issues from the situations that you observe. The first way to do this is to draw on your personal experience. The odds are pretty good that other people shared similar experiences, so they're definitely going to be interested in what you have to say. You also want to identify as what is open to dispute. Figure out what the conflicting points of view actually are. Sometimes they're not as obvious as you think they are. And this one's hard because it's kind of been ingrained in us, but try to resist the binary thinking. So that's the either or mindset. There are usually more than two sides to every argument, two sides to every story, right? Issues are much more complex than we generally give them credit for. And then you also want to build on and extend the ideas of others. And this is a good thing to think about when you're reading your Eagleman textbook, because as you start getting into it, he'll start making more and more arguments that are definitely open to dispute. And that's kind of when you're going to start trying to find your way into that conversation with him. What's incredibly helpful if you are trying to come up with an issue-based question, one that's complex and requires an arguable answer, is you want to really kind of approach the world with a healthy dose of skepticism. I am a naturally skeptical person, so this comes pretty easy to me. But you want to kind of try to aim for the point of maximum conflict. And you want to, exist out in the world when you're prepping these questions with half curiosity and half skepticism. Because curiosity will help you come up with some more positive answers than you would have otherwise expected, and skepticism will help you find your way into these arguments. So here's an example. Someone says, I've invented an air-powered car, right? The natural skeptic in myself is going to doubt the person's claim. I'm going to consider whether or not they have any hidden agenda. I'm going to wonder if they are actually the first to invent an air-powered car. And then the curious mind, right, we're going to try to get at some more answers, not just answers regarding validity, but we're going to look at answers regarding the value. So we're going to take what they say as true, and we want to figure out, is it useful and how does it compete with gas-powered cars? What are the negative side effects of introducing air vehicles into the marketplace? Who funded the research? What does this person stand to claim? So if you already have kind of a healthy dose of skepticism, you should be well on your way to coming up with these issue-based questions. A good question, like I previously mentioned, does develop out of an issue. You want to make sure that you can form a question that will help you think about what you may be interested in writing about, and you want to make sure that your question is specific enough that will guide inquiry into what others have written. So you want to make it specific enough to open some type of door. It will help you, an issue-based question will help you accomplish the following. You can figure out what you know about the issue and what you still need to know. It'll help you focus your inquiry. It will help you organize your inquiry. It will help you develop an argument. and it will help you determine what resources you already have and what resources you're missing. So here's an example. One topic that I'm particularly interested in professionally is grade inflation in community colleges. And then I expand my topic into a phrase, and generally you can kind of chunk these two parts together here. So you can say, I am interested in grade inflation in community college because it seems to be the standard on most campuses. And that's me just saying that from my own personal experience. You'll notice I'm not supporting it with any sources or anything. That's just an observation I've made being in higher ed for a number of years. And so what I do now is I identify an issue, and now I take issue with this idea that grade inflation exists, and that it's kind of prevalent. So my issue would be the widespread prevalence of grade inflation in community colleges creates a false sense of entitlement that students may carry into the workforce. So that's my issue, is that we keep giving students high grades even though they don't deserve them, and then they go out into the working world and expect immediate promotions or raises, or not to have to do a whole lot of work because they haven't really had to be challenged. And so I take my issue and I'm going to formulate it into a question. That question is, it's not how do we get rid of grade inflation, right? Because that's so gigantic, and I don't really have space to argue that, and I'm not really focused enough. So I want to make sure that I have a focused question. And this one is, how can we encourage our students and build their self-esteem while also preparing them for a competitive and often impersonal workplace? Here's another example of a topic that is athletes and off-field violence. My interest in this topic would be, I am interested in athletes being violent off the field because I like to watch professional sports and have looked up to some of the athletes being accused of committing violence off the field. Sure. And I'm going to identify an issue with that, right? My issue is the link between professional athletes, particularly football players, and violence has been potentially linked to concussions, but no one has studied how the football community, fans and otherwise, have contributed to this behavior. So I'm acknowledging that some possible link exists, right? Some link between concussions and violence exists. But what I also want to consider potentially is, what about these concussions? Is this football community and the fact that we praise our football players, has it also contributed to these behaviors? Because it basically creates athletes that don't have any accountability and think that they are untouchable. So my question is, has the football community, in essence, created monsters by fueling the egos of professional football players? That is a complex issue-based question that has an answer that is absolutely arguable. And that's kind of the thing that I'm really looking for you to create. So you want to make sure you have an issue-based question that is complex and whose answer may be arguable. And start thinking about those, because not this coming week, but the week after, you're going to have to write a proposal, a topic proposal, and that topic proposal will require a specific issue-based question. And that's it. Thank you, and let me know if you have any questions.